Welcome to Life Stories, where we explore the profound journeys of personal transformation, strength, and healing. Today's story is one of resilience, betrayal, and rediscovery. Follow the journey of Emily, a woman whose world is shattered by a devastating accident, only to find herself faced with a choice: to remain a victim of her circumstances or rise above them. This is a tale of loss, self-discovery, and ultimately, reclaiming one's power. Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe to start the story today. Every life story is an opportunity to learn, grow, and heal. I had always believed that life could be as simple as we let it be. For years, I held on to the notion that happiness could be found in the smallest of things: a smile from a stranger, a hand held in the quiet hours of the evening, a promise of tomorrow, and I truly believed that nothing could shake that belief. After all, I had my love, my home, my dreams, and finally, after 4 long years of trying, I had a pregnancy test that showed 2 pink lines. It was a sunny afternoon when I saw the picture on my phone, and my heart leapt in my chest. I was sitting in my car, waiting for the light to turn green, grinning at the screen. The test results so simple, yet so monumental. The tiny little lines meant everything. They meant a new life. The one I had desperately longed for. The one Cole and I had hoped for every day since our wedding. My hands trembled with the anticipation of sharing this news with him. I imagined his face when I told him, the joy we would share, and the future that awaited us. The radio played a cheesy love song, the kind I usually rolled my eyes at. But today, it was perfect. It felt like a soundtrack to this moment. Everything seemed to fall into place, as if the world itself were offering a silent nod of approval. It felt like the beginning of something wonderful. But life has a way of throwing you off course when you least expect it. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. The sound of a truck slamming into my car was deafening, the violent collision tearing through the air like a thunderstorm. Time seemed to slow in the chaos that followed. The screech of metal, the crunch of glass, the panic in my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My head was spinning, my body heavy, as though the world was fading into the background. And through the disorienting fog of pain, there was only one thing I could focus on: my phone. The picture of the test. I had to make sure Cole saw it. Somehow, I reached for it, clutching it tightly in my hand. The screen still visible even as the world crashed around me. I don't remember the exact moment the paramedics found me, or how long it took for them to get me out of the car. The last thing I recall before everything went black was the voice of the man who had caused the crash, repeating over and over, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," as though his words could somehow undo the damage. The next thing I knew, I woke up 5 days later in a hospital room. The sterile smell of the place, the beeping of machines, and the soft murmur of voices around me made everything feel foreign, unreal. And there he was, Cole, sitting beside me, asleep in a chair, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven, dark circles beneath his eyes, as though the weight of something heavy was dragging him down. I tried to lift my hand, but it felt so heavy, like it wasn't mine. My voice barely came out as a whisper. "Cole." His eyes snapped open, locking onto mine, and in that moment, I saw something in his gaze, something cold, something distant. It made my stomach tighten with unease. But then he smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and took my hand. "You had us all worried," he said, his voice hoarse. I tried to smile back, but my face felt stiff, foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. My thoughts raced, my heart ached. I wanted to ask about the baby, but the words were caught in my throat, and instead, I whispered, "The baby?" Cole's grip on my hand tightened. His face shifted, and for the first time since the accident, his eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion, guilt, regret, maybe even sorrow, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I'm so sorry, Emily," he said softly, his voice trembling. "The doctors did everything they could. The world spun beneath me. I closed my eyes, fighting the pain and the numbing haze of medication that clouded my mind. I could barely grasp what had just happened. The baby I had dreamed of, the child we had hoped for, was gone. I couldn't make sense of it. I thought of all the moments I had imagined with that child. All the milestones we would have shared. And then, it was over. The loss was too much to bear. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I heard voices outside the room. Vivian, Cole's mother, had arrived. I could smell her perfume before I even heard her voice, always so controlled. So carefully measured. Cole, honey, the doctor needs to talk to you, she said, her voice gentle but firm. I could hear her but didn't want to listen. I didn't want to hear more about what was happening to me. More about the surgeries I would need. The bandages that would hide my face. I could feel the tears sliding down my cheeks. Silently, as the world continued on around me. They were already making plans for my recovery. Already talking about me like I was some sort of problem to be fixed. In that moment, something inside me broke. The warmth, the hope, the optimism that had always been my driving force, started to fade away. It was replaced by something colder, harder. I didn't understand it yet. But I knew that this was the beginning of the end of who I had been. The woman who had dreamed of a family. The loving wife. The hopeful mother-to-be. That woman was slipping away. Something darker, something more resilient, was starting to take her place. I couldn't explain it at the time. But I felt it deep within me. And it scared me. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and numbness. I moved through each day like I was watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. I was in my own home, surrounded by the familiar sights of our neat suburban house, the faint smell of Jack's cologne in the entryway, and the small touches of comfort that once made it feel like a haven. But nothing felt the same. Everything felt distant, cold, foreign. Jack, my husband, barely looked at me. It was as though I had become something to avoid. Something too difficult to confront. He moved through the motions of caring for me, bringing me meals, helping me with the smallest tasks, but it was all robotic. Like he was following a script. I could feel his avoidance, his discomfort with the woman I had become. And then, of course, there was Linda, Jack's mother, who took it upon herself to manage every aspect of my recovery. She was everywhere, always present, always hovering, with her well-meaning advice and her need to control every decision. I could feel her eyes on me, always analyzing, always pushing for me to be fixed. But she didn't care about me. She cared about Jack's image, his career, his perfect life. She was already planning my recovery as though it were a business project to solve. The worst part was that Jack couldn't even meet my eyes. He couldn't look at me without flinching. I could see the guilt in the way he avoided me, the way he struggled to touch me, as though my presence was a reminder of something he couldn't bear. And still, he couldn't bring himself to admit what he had done. Every night, I could hear him speaking softly on the phone. But when I tried to catch a glimpse of his conversations, he would immediately silence his phone, retreating into silence. One night, after another of Jack's late-night phone calls, I found something that made my blood run cold. I was standing in the kitchen, still reeling from the conversations I'd overheard, when I noticed a half-empty whiskey bottle tucked behind the cleaning supplies. Jack had hidden it, but I had found it. I always found everything. As I stood there, the words from his late-night whispers echoed in my mind. The cruelty in his voice, the way he joked about my scars, about my ruined face, made something inside me break. I couldn't understand how someone who had once loved me, someone who had once promised to cherish me, could be capable of such hatred. The next morning, I couldn't look at him. His presence felt like a lie, like I had been living in a world of illusions. And then I made the decision. I was going to change. I was going to rebuild myself. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. I would take control of my life, of my body, of my future. The surgery would be my first step in that transformation. I was no longer the woman I had been before the accident. I couldn't be. But perhaps, in the process of becoming someone new, I could find myself again. The decision wasn't easy. It was about more than just the way I looked. it was about reclaiming my power. About reshaping who I was after everything that had been taken from me. It was about taking back the pieces of myself that had been shattered in the crash and in Jack's betrayal. I didn't tell Jack about the surgery. I didn't owe him that. I didn't owe him any more of my time, my energy, or my heart. Instead, I packed up my things, gathered the little strength I had left, and left for the clinic in Jacksonville. It felt like the beginning of something new. A rebirth. A place where I could become someone who wasn't defined by the pain or by Jack's actions. A place where I could become someone stronger. Someone who could stand on her own. As the days passed, I saw my face change in the mirror. The swelling, the pain, the bruising, it was all part of the process. Part of the healing. But something more profound was happening inside me. Something I hadn't expected. I wasn't just becoming someone new physically. I was learning, slowly, that my worth wasn't tied to my appearance. That I didn't need Jack's approval to feel whole. I was learning to be my own person again. The woman who had once been full of hope and optimism. The woman who had been ready to build a family. Was gone. But the woman who was emerging in her place was more resilient. More determined. And more alive than I had ever been before. I had to hold on to that strength. Because deep down, I knew it was the only thing that would carry me forward. 4 months had passed since the surgery. And I barely recognized myself anymore. I looked in the mirror each morning, seeing a face that was both familiar and entirely new. It was still me, but it was not the woman Jack had married. I had become someone else. Someone who no longer needed his approval. Someone who no longer craved the love he had taken for granted. I settled into my new life. Slowly but surely. The apartment in Jacksonville, a small but cozy place provided by Arthur Stern, became my sanctuary. It was quiet and free from the weight of my past. The city was bustling, a far cry from the suburban neighborhood where I had once lived with Jack. But here, I felt a sense of peace. There were no questions, no expectations, just the sound of my own heartbeat, my own breath. I spent my days painting. Art had always been something I'd wanted to do but had pushed aside for the sake of my marriage. Jack had always insisted that I focus on more practical things, the house, the future, our careers. But now, painting became my lifeline. It was my way of expressing the pain, the grief, the betrayal, and the healing that I could not put into words. Each stroke of the brush was a step closer to rediscovering who I was. But no matter how much I tried to move on, no matter how much I submerged myself in my art, I couldn't escape the past. It followed me, lurking at the edges of my thoughts, creeping into my dreams. Jack's voice echoed in my mind. His lies, his avoidance, his cruel indifference. And then came the phone call. "Emily, it's done. The divorce papers are signed," Arthur said over the phone. His voice was calm, steady, but I could hear the relief in it. I had done it. I had finally freed myself from the man who had betrayed me. From the life that had once seemed so perfect. The contract had been signed. The papers filed, but part of me still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won anything. The anger that had once burned so fiercely inside me, the desire for revenge that had driven me to this point, had begun to fizzle out. What had I really gained by all of this? A life without Jack. Yes. A face that was no longer a reminder of my pain. Yes. But still, something was empty inside me. I had set my life in motion. But the past continued to haunt me. And then came the gallery opening. Arthur had insisted on showcasing my work in his art gallery. He was proud of my progress. Proud of how far I had come. But for me, it felt like a public declaration of everything I had lost and everything I had fought to rebuild. My paintings, raw and powerful, reflected the struggle I had been through. They were about masks, about lies, about the things people hide from the world. As I stood in front of my artwork, I saw them, Jack and his mother, standing in the gallery, staring at my paintings. Jack looked thinner, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, as though he were seeing me for the first time. He had changed, but so had I, and in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need revenge. I needed closure. I stepped toward him, my heart beating loudly in my chest. And he turned to look at me. The recognition was instant, and I could see the shock in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had nothing left to say. You destroyed everything, Jack, I said softly, my voice steady but full of the emotion I had fought to contain for so long. But it doesn't matter anymore. I'm done with you. The room went silent, the weight of my words sinking in. And then, before he could react, I walked away. It was done. I was free, no longer defined by Jack, by the betrayal, by the pain. I was Emily, and I was starting to live again. As the years passed, I learned that healing isn't linear, it's a journey. The woman I was before the accident, the one who loved deeply and believed in the goodness of others, had to fade away for something new to emerge. I realized that true strength isn't in revenge or in holding on to the past. It's in reclaiming your life, piece by piece, and finding joy in the smallest of moments again. Arthur had been my steady guide through all of it, never rushing, never pushing me to heal faster than I was capable. And in time, his patience helped me understand something profound, that we are not defined by the pain we carry but by how we choose to move forward. He never tried to fix me, he simply allowed me to be, to create, to breathe, and that was enough. At the gallery, standing in front of my work, I realized that I had transformed my grief, my anger, and my sorrow into something beautiful. The paintings told my story, but they also spoke to others who had been through their own struggles. They were a testament to resilience, to the quiet power of finding yourself in the darkest of times. I walked into a future that was mine, one where I was free of the ghosts of my past. I didn't need anyone's approval or love to feel whole. I was complete on my own. And that was the greatest lesson I could ever learn. Thank you for following my story. If you'd like to hear more life stories and gain insight into the strength of the human spirit, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for new videos. There's always more to learn and more to share.